Welcome to Disruption Dialogues Podcast Season 2. Listen to the influential leaders and trailblazers from around the world as they share invaluable insights to navigating the fifth industrial revolution.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Disruption Dialogues Season 2. I'm your host, Vinod Chikkareddy, Chief Customer Officer at MarketsandMarkets. Today, I'm in conversation with Brigitte Nolet, President and CEO at Roche Canada Pharma, and our topic is the future of healthcare. Welcome, Brigitte, to Disruption Dialogues. We are very happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here on such a big topic as well, Vinod, to start the year. Thank you.
As a quick introduction for our audience, Brigitte oversees the growth of the Canadian division of Roche Pharma and helps the division with growth and success in healthcare solutions. With a progressive leadership background at Roche since 2006, she has held roles such as the Director of Government Affairs, the General Manager for Roche Belgium, and the Integrated Franchise Leader in UK. Brigitte actively engages externally as well, serving as the Chair of the Board for Innovative Medicines Canada and contributing to various boards and associations advocating for transformative medicines and resilient health systems. Let's get us started quickly today, Brigitte. Let's start with a macro perspective. Can you help us with an overview of the current status of Canada, not just looking at healthcare, but also the Canadian economy, the healthcare system that they have there, and any notable features that distinguish it from other nations?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. It's a big one to just start with, tell us about Canada. But I'm a proud Canadian, Vinod, and proud to be back in the country after being away in Europe for 9 years. And so I have that opportunity to bring different perspectives to this role now. And, maybe to answer your question, we'll start a bit macro to your point, and then funnel into healthcare and then the life sciences sector overall, because I think Canada is just starting to hit its strides when it comes to research and the life sciences sector. And I think 2024, if we want it to be, can be a real year of impact. So let's start with Canada as a whole. I think what might be interesting to your listeners and to your viewers is the fact that we just hit 40 million people in 2023. So we're a large country, of course, right? Landmass wise, I think second to Russia. But at the end of the day, we've been working as a country in terms of how do we bring up our population and hit 40 million, which is important to us through immigration policies and different ways that we're ensuring the economy and the stability of our systems going forward. So 40 million people. But what's really interesting is that 90% of us live along the US border because we border the United States of America. And so within about 240 kilometers of the border is where 90% of us live. So I think that's about 150 miles if you have any American listeners and viewers. So it's just a really interesting part of who we are. Certainly, we're very well known for our natural resources in Canada, oil, forestry, etc. I think what's important, though, and what we're going to talk about today is the importance of the life sciences sector and why science and research and artificial intelligence are growing capabilities in Canada that are part of the future of our economy, which make us very proud. But perhaps before we get there, maybe the last thing to offer is that apart from our trading partners, which I think are the United States, of course, as our largest trading partner, then China and the United Kingdom, we're also still part of the Commonwealth in Canada. And so we're a constitutional monarchy, and our parliamentary system is based on the British parliamentary system. And so that's part of who we are as a country. Maybe thinking about healthcare overall, I think what might be interesting as a base for our discussion is the fact that in Canada, it is actually not one Canadian healthcare system. I think sometimes we talk about countries as though it's one thing, but in Canada, healthcare is actually delivered at the provincial level. So here we have a federal government. We're a federation in Canada. So it's a federal government and provincial governments, and then of course, municipal governments. And healthcare has components that are federally based, and the delivery of healthcare, so the hospital systems, are within the provincial settings. So when we do our work all together, all of us as healthcare partners, we are actually talking about 14 healthcare systems in Canada, not one. And so I just think that's important because it explains why sometimes there can be some friction in the system, why sometimes we talk about how we can improve regulatory policy or legislative policy. It's because we have a system that is made up of different stakeholders and different governments that are delivering healthcare for Canadians. So important to keep in mind. And maybe the last piece or a few more pieces before we get to the broader economic question you had is we're also known around the world as having a public healthcare system, and largely it is. So these 14 healthcare systems are administered by governments, and yet we also have a private healthcare system that also exists in Canada. And what I mean by that is if you are in a hospital, healthcare is delivered publicly. If you are a student or above 65, or you are receiving social benefits from the government, you are covered by a public system. But otherwise, you actually have your medicines, for example, reimbursed by your employer in the private setting for the most part, if you aren't falling within one of those categories. So it is a mix of public healthcare and private insurance, somewhat like you might see in some European countries. So just a sense of how that delivery for patients happens. We also have, I think, a fair and high investment in healthcare that takes place in Canada. I think we're the 5th largest OECD spender in terms of our healthcare spend, and that would be after the United States, Germany, Netherlands, and Sweden, I believe, and it's Canada. So the question that we often have in Canada in our conversations is how do we ensure that we continue to invest in healthcare at the right levels, knowing we're already investing very highly? How do we get more efficient with our spend? How do we understand that the spend is going in the right places and having the right impact? And so that's part of the conversation I think we'll be having today. And I think maybe to just talk a little bit about the economic side, which you asked about, I think what's really exciting about Canada is, as I mentioned before, the fact that while we might be known for natural resources, we have a really strong base in research. Whether you're talking about our past with insulin and the discovery of insulin or not, when we think about what we're doing now, research in stem cell, research in genomics, research in precision medicine, that's all taking place right now across the country. And so there was an interesting report that came out last year. It's from the Coalition of a Better Future and came out in March of 23. And it talked about the different sectors that are important to the economy of Canada. And the life sciences sector is one of the few economies that can continue to grow, or one of the few sectors that can continue to grow and support the economic development of the country. And I think that's really important because we have to think about both elements. How does this sector continue to evolve and support economic health and economic growth? And how does that research then translate into our healthcare systems in order to help Canadians have better healthcare and have better outcomes? And so we are roughly about 107,000 Canadians or employees across the sector in Canada. That's based on a Statistics Canada report of 2020. So we're about 107,000 of us across the country. We generate about $16 billion of economic activity for the country, and about 2.4 billion of that work is also in research and development. So again, I think to summarize all of that, it's not just a country of polite, wonderful people that are living here and that are obsessed with hockey. It is also a country that is very thoughtful, that is very research driven, that has a healthcare system that is fragmented as a federation, but that is wanting to move forward and wanting to really make improvements, understanding that healthcare is both about the economic health of a country and the health of its citizens. And that's where we can continue to improve in 2024.
Wow. I mean, 15% of the entire economic activity going into research and development is a crazy statistic. I would love to dig a little deeper into that, Brigitte, if you would. What are the areas where this research and development and innovation is happening in? What are the top advances happening? We definitely hear about all the changes that technology is bringing into healthcare.
Yeah.
I'm really curious, what's this 2.5 billion in R&D spend going into? Where's the innovation happening?
And do you know what? It's across the board. I think that's what's so wonderful about the Canadian research landscape is that we've got the best and some of the best and the brightest in the world working here. Whether you think about Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver or Edmonton or even Halifax, Nova Scotia, you know, what we have are researchers that are thinking about, and I think it's the blend, Vinod, of really strong academic institutions and public healthcare institutions that partner together and that come together. So we have a huge level of startups that can take place because of that fusion within these settings. And what you see across the country is investments in genomics research, investments in stem cell research, investments in precision medicine taking place. And you see it consistently. And what I think is important to your question is, you know, when I look at all the life sciences sector strategies that have been launched from our different governments, whether it's provincial or federal, it isn't that Canada can do everything. Canada is still a small country in terms of its economic generation. But it is a country that can experiment and push in different research areas. And so the question becomes, where are the real points where we could excel? And what we see from our governmental strategies is we excel in gene therapy, in cell therapy, CAR T cell therapy, and we also excel in artificial intelligence and computational research. And I think this is an area of advancement that we should talk about because it's one of the areas where Canada, when I came back, I didn't realize that in the 9 years I was gone, that we developed such a capability in artificial intelligence and what that means in terms of machine learning. And that's only a helpful thing if we can use it in the right ways within the health setting and within the research setting. And so now you're seeing a whole community and ecosystem of AI health research companies starting to flourish because of the AI centers of excellence that we're seeing in Toronto, in Montreal, and out in Alberta. And for me, I think what's important to think about, Vinod, is AI is an enabler. It's only as good as the information that it is given, right? And so AI is about how to think about the insights it gives us, how to think about the ways it changes our practices. And so what's important in Canada and for us to see accelerate over the course of this year, 2024, is our data systems, our health data systems, which for me is really important. We saw it through the pandemic, didn't we, in the lockdown phases, how information needed to be collected in order to understand what public health measures, what research initiatives needed to move quickly. And so where we still have to continue to improve in Canada is in the health data space. We don't have interconnected data systems within each of the provinces that then speak to each other across the country. And that is one of the big learnings for Canada, in particular coming out of the COVID phases. And that's one area where I think in order for us to flourish and take advantage of the rest of our capabilities, whether it's genomics, stem cell, AI, we have to have the right health data infrastructure. What I don't want to do is give you the impression that there isn't movement in that space. What we saw in 23 actually was our federal government come forward in the first quarter of last year and say, and they tend to be the big funders of healthcare. So they provide funding to the provincial governments who also have their own funding mechanisms for healthcare. And so there's always a discussion about health transfers, just as a way of background. And what was interesting is in the health transfer discussion of last year, the federal government made it clear that it would only transfer funding to the provinces, new funding to the provinces, if the provincial government moved forward on a health data infrastructure in its province, which was really quite a position to take. And it has resulted in very passionate and very fruitful discussions between the provincial governments, the territorial governments, and the federal government in terms of how we create this data infrastructure. And it's allowed different stakeholders like ourselves, whether it's Roche Canada or the life sciences sector, to also come forward and understand how we can be helpful in that discussion. And I learned a lot myself being in Europe on this file, because Europe is laser focused on the European health data space, aren't they? I mean, they know that they need to work as different countries, let alone within a country. They're coming together across 27 countries to think about different frameworks, governmental frameworks that need to be in place, different research approaches that need to be in place, different infrastructures that need to be in place. And so I think Canada is on its path. I think that we cannot slow down. We have to keep moving forward. We can learn from Europe, and then we have to be in other countries, but we have to move as quickly as we can in order to be able to make an impact in that space. And if the health data space then improves, I mean, data saves lives. So if we can move in this space, then we start to make all the right decisions, whether you're in research or clinical development, whether you're in a hospital or a clinician trying to deliver better healthcare with your patient, or whether you're at the public level trying to understand where you put that precious investment. I think the data space is where we need to move.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the work we at Markets and Markets do in the space is also around helping not just healthcare organizations, but technology organizations
Quite.
figure out where this data lies for the AI to become valuable. As you said, the quality of AI output is as good as the input. So helping them find the right data sources, making sure that they are building up the models in a way which are meaningful, providing 2.9, 3.9 accuracy. I think that will be important in the healthcare space. And that's a lot of the work that we do with them as well. Thanks for sharing that. Looking at healthcare technology itself, and we keep hearing about multi-omic technologies and how they are gaining prominence in the space, and a lot of the innovations coming in there. What impact are, in your view, multi-omic technologies expected to have on precision medicine?
That's a big question. That's a big question, Vinod. You know, I think what's really interesting is, well, I think this is the time for the life sciences, right? I think what's interesting is this explosion of science that's now taking place. And every few decades, we have one of these moments, one of these pivotal moments of convergence. And I think that's what's happening right now, is that we are seeing science advance at a pace we haven't seen before, faster and faster, thanks to technology. And what we're seeing is that convergence between science and research and technology, and how technology is now advancing and helping us advance better science. And it, you know, you could say that, in fact, this convergence of the two is actually revolutionizing. It's revolutionizing the way that we are researching, the way that we're discovering new medicines, the way that we're discovering new diagnostics and new diagnostic capabilities. And I think it has the promise to really even allow us to think differently about prevention of illness as we go forward. So I think this whole space is quite interesting. And I think that technology is going to be a big part of it. I think for us, you know, in Canada, equally, it is an exciting time to be in the life sciences sector for all of the reasons that we talked about before, in terms of our capabilities in research, our capabilities to grow economic stability, our capabilities to be able to do better for patients, which is ultimately what we're all trying to solve, right? We're researching because we want solutions to help people live better, stronger, longer lives. And so for me, when I think about all the research taking place in Canada, and I think about the advancements, right? Stem cell therapy, genomics, you know, we're no longer talking about, you know, we're talking about tumor agnostic when we think about oncology. And what do I mean by that? I mean, you know, we're not talking about breast cancer anymore or stomach cancer. We're talking about a tumor and its genetic expression and how we understand the tumor, and then how we treat the tumor no matter where it is in the body. And when you think about how that's changing, that means our whole system has to change to adapt to it, because our clinical practice is to treat by body part. Our regulatory system reviews and approves medicines and diagnostics based on body part testing. And so how do we think about these new transformative medicines and how they make their way from research to the person that they're intended to help? And that for me is the really important part of how we have to think about meeting this revolution where it is, because in Canada, it is taking a very long time for our medicines to get to patients. And I'm not sure if you're aware of, but it will take upwards of 2 years for a medicine to make its way through the system after regulatory review. And in Europe, it's about a year. And so we're taking a year longer than our peer countries in Western Europe for the same medicines to make their way to our citizens. And so I think about that, and I think about the ways that we could improve. And that's changes that we can all make together as stakeholders, but it is something we have to work on with urgency, because the innovation is only as good as it is. It's only helpful if it actually reaches the people it's intended to reach at the time when they need that medicine. And so we have to work with urgency to think about how our different systems, whether they be policy systems, regulatory systems, legal systems, how do they all need to change and evolve in order for that new science to make its way to Canadians in a really timely way. And maybe the example I leave you with, to just make it more concrete, is the thought around rare diseases in particular, right? Because we're seeing wonderful progress in areas and diseases that we haven't been able to treat for 30, 40, 50 years. And we're starting to see new medicines come forward. That's the beauty of things like gene therapy, right? It's in areas almost that are in rare conditions, and they have such promise. And yet I'm going to quote something that has come from OrphaNet, which tells us that, and this is in 2022, it tells us that in Canada, only 60% of treatments for rare diseases are even approved in Canada compared to Europe. And when you think about that 60%, what I read is that of the 60% approved, less than half are publicly reimbursed within our systems. And so that tells me, Vinod, that Canadians are not getting access to medicines the way some of our other peer countries are. And what are the reasons for that? And what can we be doing all together to make a difference? And so it's about how do we make sure that we're thinking about our systems less so in a sequential way, right? You have this step, then this step, then this step, then this step. But how do we think and learn from COVID, where we saw concurrent systems working together, where we saw rolling submissions working together, where we worked as a team to make sure that we were doing everything we could for the benefit of patients? And I think we have to have that same sense of collaboration when it comes to rare diseases and new medicines. How do we think right now about what needs to change in order for medicines to make their way to Canadians in a timely way? And I don't want to leave you the impression that work is not happening. We also saw movement, for example, with a rare diseases strategy being launched in the first quarter of last year by our federal government. It is continuing to evolve. I think 2023 was a great year for consultation on that strategy. What I want to be able to impress with urgency to our listeners and viewers today is that 23 was the year to talk through the strategy. The strategy is good. The strategy now needs to be implemented. And so for all of these things, how do we now move forward with implementation, and implementation that has boldness and urgency behind it, because Canadian patients can't keep waiting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to see a little more detailing around why it takes 2 times the duration to get the medicine in the hands of patients in Canada. That's definitely worth some more deep dive, and I'm glad to hear that the right steps are already being taken to move them there. Did you call it the strategy for rare disease drugs? Is that
That's one example? Yes. Yeah. So there was a release of the federal strategy for drugs for rare diseases last March in 2023. So that's one of the examples of a strategy that's being released to really think about this gap in medicines coming to Canada, which I think is important. We also have seen really good dialogue with our health technology bodies in Canada to think about how we could, again, in the Canadian system, everything is sequential. And because it's a fragmented delivery system, right, with federal involvement, provincial government involvement, and territorial government involvement, we tend, if you followed the current process, you follow each step. And then there are gaps in time between each step. And so that's what starts to make things longer and longer. And so the question for all of us, ourselves included in the life sciences sector, is how might we either shorten some of those timeframes or start to think about doing things concurrently more often so that we can make up some of that time between the important steps. So health technology assessment bodies are talking to us, and I think we're going to see some good movement with that kind of consideration. We have Health Canada consultations underway, thinking about how to be more agile with our review system. So in Canada, we have our own regulatory agency that reviews medicines for efficacy and safety. Like the US FDA, we have our own Health Canada reviewers. So how do we make sure that that whole system is as modern as it needs to be for Canada to be a leader in this sector? And we could talk a little bit more about that, Vinod, if you want to, because I think there are some opportunities there as well for us to continue to be leaders with the scientific rigor that we have within the country. But that's mainly, hopefully that answers your question a little bit better as to,
Yes,
I realize it's still high level, but as to why the time is as long as it is. And what I want to impart on you is there's no stakeholder within the system that thinks that that time frame is okay. We all want to improve it. And I think what's great is that we spent 23 understanding where those levers are and where the opportunities are. And I hope in 24, we get to a place now where we start to implement what we think could work, all of us, and where we lean on each other and to support each other in being able to get to that work and implement the changes required so that by the time we get to 25, we see more quicker timeframes, more efficient timeframes coming forward.
super. I think it's definitely in the right steps, acknowledging that there is a challenge, knowing at all levels, and then working towards it. That seems like the economy is on the right step to address the problem of medicine access to patients. Just shifting gears a little and looking at the other topic which we spoke about, which is digital. And let me take a step back and see what's happening, right? Around 10 years ago, IBM came up with Watson, which at that point of time was positioned to be a transformative tool for healthcare and several other industries as well. And over a period of time, we've had Google and Microsoft also come up with their own offerings. And OpenAI has, in the last 12 to 18 months, they've literally transformed how data can be transformed into insights with the power of LLMs, large language models. So my question to you is very specific, Brigitte. What are you seeing as a leader in the space for a long time? What in all these technology companies' work is really transforming digital health solutions?
Yeah, it is.
And specifically, how are the delivery and healthcare experience for patients changing as a result of all of these technology interventions?
Yeah, it's an important question because I think that we're seeing that evolution become faster and faster, aren't we? The loops are moving faster. I don't know about you, Vinod. I still remember, maybe because I'm that old, but I still remember my very first email address, right? It was like in 1994, I got my first email address at university, and I still had to walk to the computer labs from my dorm to be able to access my email, right? Think about that. And that's not so long ago. When you really think about change and technological change over the centuries, it's not that long ago. And here we are now talking about editing genes. We're talking about how computational research is evolving, how synthetic arms in clinical trials are now taking place, and we have to understand what they mean. How wearables are a big part of how clinical trials are now run because we can do remote monitoring, and how we think about what that means. And I'm really glad you asked about the patient, because I think, again, they're at the center of all of this. We do all of this work because we want to help people, and we want to help people who need new medicines, new diagnostics when they need them. And I think while, the conversation around digital health and AI in health is relatively new in the grand scheme of things, right? Because we've seen AI in other sectors for quite some time, but it's gaining prominence now very quickly within the healthcare space, or at least more attention now. And I understand the balance between needing to think about the ethical and responsible frameworks around it, which we should talk about. But I think the potential is massive, and I already see it within some of our work. And I can give you examples, and they are impacting people's lives right now. And so digital health and AI is about how we create it and how we make sure that we're flourishing it and arming it with the right information. And what we see, for example, in our clinical trials is remote monitoring, where you are reporting on your iPad different elements of your care and your journey with your medicine and your illness. And then the minute that starts to fluctuate, physicians are then able to call you in. And so you're getting real-time care. You're being called in the moment. You're not waiting the 6 months to see your clinician for that next appointment. They're calling you in as they start to see fluctuations in your reporting, which I think is really important. I know we've got examples of work that we're doing. Maybe I give you two. One is in multiple sclerosis, for example. We're working with an institution in Toronto, and we're looking, you're able to think about micro lesions, and in AI being able to support scans and help clinicians understand the smallest of micro lesions, so that if they're seeing that on the scan, they can then call the patient in quickly. Because in MS, the faster that you can treat, the better, right, that the patient is. And so before the lesions get too big. And so how can you see that better and be able to make a clinical decision for your patient in a faster way? We're seeing the same thing in ophthalmology. In Canada, we're such a large country. Again, our landmass being huge, rural communities don't have the same level of clinical care as the larger cities. And so what we often see is that people travel hundreds of kilometers, to get care. And that's a cost. It's a big cost to be able to travel to your large healthcare center. And so what you can see, for example, using digital support and AI in ophthalmology is that in rural communities, perhaps a nurse practitioner can run your scans, the scans on your eyes, and then these scans then come to a physician within an urban healthcare setting, and they're able to work with the AI tool. The AI tool is then giving recommendations, and the physician is then able to say yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, as to who needs to come in, thereby saving the system hundreds of thousands of dollars from this travel. It's also saving the patient from having to travel in and disrupt their work schedule, their family schedule, the cost of travel, all of these elements that come with it if they don't need to come in. And so I think it's about us really understanding the promise of technology in the right way and thinking about it as we go forward. And I think that's what's really exciting. And I think, for me, when I think about digital health, AI, I think what's really important is that this is a capability that Canada has. Like, not many countries have it the way we have it. We are a global leader in AI. We are a global leader in computational research. We now have this booming ecosystem of startup companies within the digital health and AI health space that companies like ours can partner with and start to understand how this research evolves. So I think Canada has every opportunity to really seize this moment in time and seize this capability and be able to advance. And one of the reasons I'm also so proud to work at Roche is also the capabilities that we have to also partner in this space with the community, because we have the pharmaceutical division, because we have the diagnostics division, and because we have a division involving within the data insights area as well. And when you bring that together, we become a partner that can really collaborate within the space to be able to advance healthcare And I think that's just a wonderful opportunity for Roche Canada, for the life sciences sector, and certainly for our future healthcare systems within the country.
Super. It's really heartening, Brigitte, to hear about the real world patient impact that all these technologies are having. The press generally tends to carry the most, how should I put it, the elaborate and glamorous parts of technology, and
It
we
is.
don't get to see the ground reality. So thanks so much for talking about that.
And I think, Vinod, if I can add, I think what's interesting, I mean, again, we have these capabilities. What we need is that backbone of the health data systems. And I think as that starts to come forward, then the ability to even make stronger decisions in Canada gets even better. And, you know, we talked about the patient lens of this technology and digital health. But as we start to understand our data systems, and as they bring the right information in for AI to be able to interpret, because it's all down to information and insights to then help people make better clinical decisions, you can also see it laddering up for hospitals and for our public healthcare systems and our governments, right? Because as they start to see that information, they can also start to make stronger decisions in terms of where they want to make that investment. How do you invest in a rare diseases strategy? How do you invest in your national cancer strategy? And how do you think about your pan-Canadian AI strategy, which we do have in Canada? And that information all starts to also ladder up from the patient to hospital systems then making the right investments, to then the public healthcare systems being able to make the right decisions. And it also helps research improve. And I think that's what's really important for us as well. For the life sciences sector, it's kind of twofold. One, the stronger the research and the stronger the data systems, the faster and the more precise we're going to get with our research. We're going to understand the data. Our endpoints are going to get more precise. We're going to be able to really think about our outcomes in a different way and what data we need to collect from the beginning to the end. So I think that's going to continue to improve, and we're going to see some real, I mean, we've already talked about the acceleration. It will get even sharper and better. And then on the other end, I think for many countries, and Canada included, having these infrastructures, these data infrastructures in place, supported by machine learning, I think also allows us to collect information in the real world setting. And you'll hear that terminology, I think, more and more often, real world evidence. And what that means is, while our sector works in a very regulated way on clinical trials, we also want to be able to monitor our medicines in the real world and understand how they're working, and to be able to collect that information so that we can work with our governments to say that the medicines are working as intended. And then how do we make sure then that those medicines are then continuously and thoughtfully reimbursed into the future? And so I think that that's also an important element of how digital health and AI and the right data infrastructure helps the evolution of our healthcare systems, from patient all the way to public healthcare system decision making and investments in healthcare. And it will be a really important enabler into it. It already is. I think the question is, how do we get this done very quickly so that it becomes even more thoughtful next year?
Yeah, I mean, I keep drawing a parallel into the retail sector. Retail sector used to cater to segments, not long back. But today,
Yeah,
if you talk to any retailer, the key words there are personalization
yeah,
and segment of one.
fair.
So I think there is in the not too far future, I think that moment will be in place for healthcare as well, where each patient will have a personalized experience, and we are able to cater to an individual based on their entire portfolio. Yes, and as we think of it, Bridget, the one thing that probably is a roadblock, and I don't know if it's a roadblock or a safeguard, depending on how you look at it, is the whole idea of data privacy. What we encounter on both sides, right? We look at technology players, we look at healthcare players. Everyone wants to make all these improvements, but data privacy, personally identifiable information, the regulatory environment, all of those come into play as safeguards from the consumer perspective and roadblocks from a advancement perspective. So what are your thoughts on this? What is Roche doing here? How are you guys striking a balance between the roadblock and the development?
Yeah, it's a really important question. And it's a very fair question. And I think we've seen how it's evolved in Europe and what some of the learnings are. And I think the benefit that we have in Canada as we're implementing is that the governments and ourselves are also already tackling these questions as we go, because it's the fundamental piece to help everything else flourish, isn't it? Data and insights, as we've talked about, are the cornerstone. And then the question becomes, how do we build the right responsible and ethical frameworks around it so that as we grow, we're doing it in the right way from the very beginning. And I think that's one of the learnings we can take from Europe, where they've had a system in place for quite some time, I think since 2017, maybe earlier, and that they've just refreshed it in the past year and a half because of their learning. So let's take from that point, and grow from there, I think is the big piece. And certainly our federal government has come forward with two things: a federal health data strategy and a federal pan-Canadian AI strategy. And then both have culminated in, in legislative approaches and regulatory approaches around these two spaces. For us as a company as well, what we've done is began actually back in, I think it was 2019, 2020, we began a whole initiative around AI, and we call it AIR, A-I-R, AI with Roche. And it was exactly what you're describing. As we're learning this space, as it's evolving, what do we understand and how do we work with our stakeholders to set the right frameworks up for ethical AI from the very beginning? Because what we want to do is to be able to accelerate our learnings and all of our insights, but we need to do it in a way that is protecting information, anonymizing information, really thinking about privacy and all of the other safeguards, as you put it, in place. So I think we're very proud of the collective work that we've done to date. And I think that that's really important. Also, as we came to the close of 2023, we also worked as a global organization with our Canadian AI Center of Excellence members and members of our Canadian community and team members to articulate our position around AI and AI ethics. And it comes down, it's more or less fourfold when we think about it. It's about making sure that while we are maximizing the use of artificial intelligence, that we are doing no harm, and that we are very clear that we maximize the benefits of AI while doing no harm, that we are thinking about safety, security, and privacy, and that these are paramount to any frameworks that we move forward on, that we are transparent about the use of AI, when we're using it, how we're using it, so that we can continue to build that trust and credibility, because that's the important element here, is how are we working together in a trusting relationship with our partners as we develop the science using these capabilities, and really thinking about that trust with patients, with our healthcare practitioners, with society at large, with our governments as we go forward. And that final piece is also, how do we understand the outputs? It's a little bit what you said earlier, right? The information that goes in, it's only as good as the information that goes in. And so AI is about how we understand the information, how we interpret the information, and how it changes our clinical practice, our research practice, our overall policy practices. So how do we just make sure that we're interpreting the outputs in the best way that we can? So I'm speaking to you at a high level, but I think the ultimate message is, for us as a company, we understand that it's where the future of research is going, that we are investing in areas like computational research. How do we think about AI algorithms? How do we think about synthetic arms in our research? How do we think about real world evidence collection in the future? And we can only do that with the right safeguards, the right ethical frameworks in place. And that's something that's a priority for the company. Maybe the other thing to add is also that I think as a broader sector and as a broader society as a whole, we do see movement within, as I mentioned before, within Health Canada as an example. We know that we're going to have to think about regulation and laws around this. As much as companies will come forward with their own positions and frameworks, we also need to see the regulatory system, think about how this new generation of research is coming forward, and how does it fold into the way that we're reviewing medicines now. And while Health Canada is undertaking a whole review and modernizing its regulatory system, we are really encouraging them to think about digital health, to think about artificial intelligence, to think about the future, which is about synthetic arms and computational research, and how do they get ahead of this now and include it in the regulatory system now, not later, so that Canada can be that world leader in this space. We say we want to be this world leader, Vinod. We say that we have global, worldwide capabilities in AI, and we do. And so the question becomes, with those capabilities, then Canada should be the world leader for these types of new medicines and diagnostics to come through. And how do we work together now as a community to encourage our regulators to think about this work, understand it, and think about it now, so that all the right safeguards are in place now, all the right regulations, or as best as we understand them, are in place now, so that we can be that world leader in the future. And I think, again, as we go forward in 2024 and into 25, the question for me is, how do we implement? How do we make action? How do we move from these wonderful strategies, which are strong, and I support them? How do we move them into real action? So from strategy to action is the message for 24, and bold action, right? How do we say we want to be world leaders, so let's do it. And we'll do it in partnership, and we'll be able to accomplish it by bringing public sector, not-for-profit sector, research sector, hospital sector, patient communities, and the private sector together, because we all want the same thing at the end of the day, right? We want a strong economic system that supports healthcare, and strong healthcare systems that support patients and their families. And that, if we can get those things accomplished, I think we will be the continued leader that we're supposed to be in Canada.
Super, Brigitte. I think we covered a whole spectrum of discussion in the last few minutes, and we started off by looking at the Canadian economy, demystifying it a bit for all our global audience, then looking at what the Canadian healthcare sector is doing, what Roche is doing in that space, the interplay of technology and healthcare, real-world evidence on how technology changes are benefiting patients, and finally looking at the future of healthcare in Canada, and what is your vision, and what is the reality that patients and their families can expect this year and the next. Very enriching. And thank you so much for being in the discussion today, Brigitte. Any final words before we close the discussion?
Maybe, just to thank you for the opportunity to continue this dialogue. You can see the passion that I have as a Canadian leader within this space. And certainly, as I said to you, I think Canada has all the right ingredients within the life sciences sector. We have the right talent, we have the right hospital systems, we have the right academic institutions, we have smart governmental colleagues, we have entrepreneurs that want to move forward. I think, we just need to keep moving forward as a collective with bold ambition and with urgency. And I think if we have this conversation again in a year and a half from now, my hope is that we're having a real discussion about how Canada has led in some very important spaces, and what we've learned from that, and how we continue to grow and move forward. So, looking forward to that future conversation.
Absolutely. Let's sync our calendars in 18 months.
Sounds good. Sounds great.
Thank you again, Brigitte, for your time and for being there for the Canadian healthcare space. Thanks to our audience for listening in, for viewing in. I was in conversation with Brigitte Nolet, President and CEO of Roche Canada Pharma. Stay tuned for more such interesting episodes on Disruption Dialogues. Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in. If you want to know how you can navigate and thrive in this disruptive era, subscribe to Disruption Dialogues on your go-to podcast channels and stay tuned for more interesting episodes.